D.B. Cooper is the guy that stole the money and jumped out the plane. Stole a bunch of money and then hijacked an airplane and then jumped out of the airplane with the money. People go missing in the woods all the time and no one finds them.
It's the most daring unsolved crime in American aviation history, and Joe Rogan just brought it roaring back into the spotlight. When D.B. Cooper hijacked a plane in 1971 and vanished into the stormy skies with big money, he didn't just disappear, he ignited a legend. But in a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, the myth was stripped away. Buckle up, because the truth is far more fascinating than fiction. A perfect crime. It was the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. A man dressed in a dark suit, white shirt, black tie and a raincoat walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He gave the name Dan Cooper and paid cash, $20, for a one-way ticket to Seattle. He boarded Flight 305, a short 30-minute trip, and sat quietly in seat 18C, ordering a bourbon and soda. The flight attendants thought nothing of him. He was polite, calm, unassuming. But shortly after takeoff, everything changed. He handed a stewardess a note. At first, she didn't read it, thinking it was just another businessman hitting on her. Cooper leaned in and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." She did. Inside his briefcase, Cooper showed her a glimpse. Wires, red cylinders. He calmly dictated his demands: $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. If the airline complied, no one would get hurt. No sudden movements, no panic, just business. Seattle authorities scrambled. When the plane landed, the passengers, unaware of the drama unfolding, were released in exchange for the ransom. Cooper now had the money and parachutes. Only the flight crew remained aboard. Then he made his move. He ordered the plane to take off again, heading south toward Mexico City at a low altitude, flaps down, cabin depressurized, clearly understanding the technical requirements for a mid-air jump. Somewhere over the thick woods of southwestern Washington, in stormy weather and total darkness, D.B. Cooper opened the rear stairs and jumped.
Greatest mysteries in all of American history. I'm talking about the hunt for the true identity of D.B. Cooper.
He vanished into legend. The FBI launched one of the most exhaustive manhunts in American history, searching forests, rivers, and small towns, but there was no sign of Cooper. No body, no parachute, no trace, just a name and a ghost. Who was D.B. Cooper? The truth is, no one really knows. The man who boarded Flight 305 called himself Dan Cooper, but that name? Fake. Invented. When news broke of the skyjacking, a reporter misheard the alias and printed it as D.B. Cooper, and the name stuck like wildfire. Suddenly, America wasn't talking about just a hijacker. It was talking about a folk hero with an unforgettable name. But peel back the pop culture myth, and what remains? The FBI, relying on crew and passenger descriptions, released a composite sketch. A white male in his mid-40s, 5 to 6 feet tall, around 170 to 180 pounds, with close-set eyes, olive skin, and neatly combed dark hair. He wore a business suit, a black overcoat, a white shirt, a narrow black tie, and sunglasses, most of which were left behind after the jump. His demeanor? Calm, courteous, controlled. He smoked Raleigh cigarettes, drank bourbon, never once raised his voice. And he knew things that suggested more than just street smarts. He was specific about the aircraft configuration. He knew the rear air stairs could be lowered mid-flight. He knew how low and slow the plane had to fly for a safe jump. He knew to request 4 parachutes, likely to ensure he wouldn't be given dummy gear. These weren't lucky guesses. They were choices informed by experience, possibly military, possibly covert. The FBI created a profile, likely a former paratrooper or special forces veteran, maybe with an engineering or explosives background. He understood pressure systems, skydiving, and negotiation. But despite an exhaustive manhunt, fingerprint analysis, and forensic work, no match was ever found. Even more bizarre, no one ever credibly claimed to know him. Not a single confirmed identity, not even after thousands of suspects were interviewed and dozens of deathbed confessions rolled in over the decades. All noise, no signal.
He has found that parachute that D.B. Cooper used, and that it could actually end the mystery once and for all.
one of the only physical clues left behind was his black JCPenney tie. That tie, tossed casually on his seat before he jumped, was analyzed decades later. Microscopic particles were discovered embedded in the fabric, rare metals like titanium and cerium, suggesting Cooper may have worked in a high-tech or aerospace environment. Boeing, a defense contractor, still speculation, but now rooted in forensic truth. The man who vanished into the sky didn't just vanish from sight, he vanished from every system designed to track people. He had no digital footprint, no clear past, and, most hauntingly, left no real trail behind. So what did the FBI actually find? What's in the thousands of pages of reports they built over 45 years before they closed the case for good? The FBI files. For nearly half a century, the D.B. Cooper case remained open at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. The FBI poured more time, more manpower, and more resources into this case than almost any other hijacking in U.S. history.
Plane hijacker who jumped out of a plane back in 1971 with $200,000 in cash.
They followed thousands of leads, questioned hundreds of potential suspects, and eventually amassed over 60 volumes of evidence. But what do those files really tell us? Let's start with the only physical items D.B. Cooper left behind on Flight 305. A black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, 8 cigarette butts, which, tragically, were lost before DNA testing became viable. 2 of the 4 parachutes left unused. The tie would later become a forensic goldmine. Decades after the hijacking, FBI forensic experts re-examined it with modern scanning electron microscopes. What they found was astonishing. Particles of rare earth metals and compounds, titanium, bismuth, cerium, strontium sulfide, elements not commonly found in consumer environments in the 1970s. These particles suggested one thing. D.B. Cooper may have worked in a specialized industry, possibly aerospace or chemical engineering. These materials were used in high-tech manufacturing at the time, specifically in environments like Boeing's development labs or defense contracting firms, areas that would have demanded technical precision and strict confidentiality. Every one of the $200,000 in ransom bills given to Cooper was recorded, $20 bills, with serial numbers logged and widely circulated to banks, casinos, and even foreign governments. For years, not a single bill turned up in circulation. Until 1980, a young boy digging along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, uncovered 3 bundles of decaying cash buried under the sand. A forensic analysis confirmed it. The serial numbers matched the Cooper money. $5,800, rotting, but intact enough to prove it was real. This single clue sparked a frenzy. How did the money end up there, miles from Cooper's estimated jump zone? Had it washed downstream, been buried intentionally, dropped mid-air? Yet no other bills were ever found. Not in circulation, not buried, not laundered, not used. And that silence from the money trail, just like Cooper himself, was deafening. The search and suspects. The FBI's immediate response was swift and immense. Aircraft were dispatched to follow Flight 305 after it took off post-ransom. They kept their distance, maintaining visual contact but unable to see the jump itself due to weather and nightfall. By the time they realized Cooper had leapt, he was long gone. The manhunt spanned forests, rivers, farms, and small towns across Washington and Oregon. Hundreds of soldiers, police, and volunteers combed the dense terrain. Helicopters swept the area. Dogs were brought in, but nothing. Not a shred of parachute fabric, not a shoe print, not a signal. And then came the flood of suspects. Over the years, the FBI would examine more than 800 individuals. Some were convincing. Many had military backgrounds. Some were even confessed criminals, but not one could be definitively tied to the skyjacker.
Greatest mysteries in all of American history. I'm talking about the hunt for the true identity of D.B. Cooper.
Several names became infamous in the public sphere. Kenneth Christiansen, Richard McCoy, Robert Rackstraw, but the FBI either dismissed them or never had enough evidence to act. By 2016, the Bureau announced it was officially closing the case, redirecting resources to higher priority investigations. Their final statement was striking in its bluntness. No definitive conclusion was reached regarding the identity of the hijacker, But what about the money that was found? What does $5,800 buried along a riverbank really tell us? The money trail. It was a cold February day in 1980, 9 years after the skyjacking, when an 8-year-old boy named Brian Ingram was digging in the sand along the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington. What he unearthed was nothing short of legendary: 3 rubber-banded stacks of decaying bills, totaling $5,800. The bills were quickly handed over to the FBI, and sure enough, the serial numbers matched. This was part of the original ransom money given to D.B. Cooper. The location, Tanner Bar, a sandy stretch along the Columbia River, was nearly 20 miles downstream from the estimated jump zone. But the geography didn't make sense. The Columbia River didn't directly intersect the suspected flight path. Even more puzzling, the money wasn't found in the water, but buried under layers of sand and sediment about 5 inches below the surface. Could the money have floated downstream? Experts said no. The bundles were in such a deteriorated condition and bound together that they seemed to have been deliberately buried, not scattered by river currents.
Literally hundreds of tips and leads over the years that have gone exactly nowhere.
And remember, Cooper jumped with the money in a bank bag, not a waterproof container. If he'd landed in the river, the bills likely would have been destroyed or dispersed. Another theory emerged. Maybe Cooper buried it as a decoy, to mislead investigators or to recover later. But if that's true, why just $5,800? And why in such a random location? Years later, a geologist named Tom Kay, who led a citizen science investigation into the case, analyzed sediment layers and found that the money appeared to have been buried years after the hijacking, possibly transported by human hands. In other words, it may have been planted, intentionally or unintentionally, well after 1971. That alone reshapes everything we thought we knew. Forensic examination of the bills revealed more clues. The serial numbers matched perfectly with those on the FBI's recorded list. The decay patterns suggested they had been exposed to moisture, but not consistent with long-term water submersion. The rubber bands, although badly degraded, were still partially intact. If they had been in the river for years, they likely would have dissolved. These details suggest the money was buried, not lost at the time of the jump, which begs the most critical question of all: was D.B. Cooper still alive to bury it? Or did someone else find the bag, maybe even the remains, and stash what they couldn't use? To this day, the remainder of the money, $194,200, has never surfaced. Not at a bank, not in circulation, not in estates or safety deposit boxes. The FBI spent years tracking serial numbers, even printing wallet-sized reference cards for banks and casinos to distribute to employees. But after the 1980 discovery, there were 0 confirmed sightings of any other ransom bills. Dead end. To this day, Brian Ingram remains the only person known to have physically touched the real D.B. Cooper money, outside of Cooper himself and the FBI agents who processed the ransom. Even if the money couldn't tell the full story, maybe the equipment could. Could anyone have survived that jump with the gear Cooper chose? And if so, how likely was it? Parachutes, physics, and probability. The moment D.B. Cooper stepped onto the lowered rear stairs of the Boeing 727 and leapt into the black sky, he wasn't just escaping with 100,000, he was taking a gamble against nature itself. It wasn't just a jump. It was a controlled plunge into wind, rain, pitch darkness, and wilderness, with almost no margin for error. And the equipment he chose? That made the odds even slimmer. Let's start with the parachutes. Cooper requested 4, which the FBI delivered from a local skydiving school. He took 2 of them, 1 primary and 1 reserve. But here's the twist. Out of the 2 reserve chutes he was given, 1 wasn't functional. It was a dummy training parachute, meant for classroom instruction, sewn shut and incapable of deploying. Cooper took it anyway, possibly without knowing. Or maybe he knew exactly what he was doing and only wanted it to help balance his descent or serve as a decoy. The main parachute he selected wasn't state-of-the-art, even for 1971.
I'm going to show you some evidence today that was recovered from the D.B. Cooper case in 1971. A parachute plane ticket.
It was a military-style, manually operated chute, sturdy but outdated compared to modern sport rigs. It required skill to deploy, and it didn't offer much steering capability. Combined with 200 mph winds and zero visibility, this wasn't some precision skydiving feat. It was a brutal blind fall into some of the most rugged terrain in America. And yet, he jumped. Outside, the temperature at 10,000 feet was just below freezing. Winds howled at over 100 knots. Rain pelted the aircraft. There was no moonlight. Below, a carpet of dark forest stretched for miles. No lights, no markers, nothing but wilderness. This wasn't some open field in the Midwest. It was the Southern Cascades, an unforgiving mix of rivers, cliffs, trees, and remote wilderness. Even expert jumpers would call it a nightmare drop zone. To survive that kind of descent required serious knowledge, both of parachuting and survival. Some investigators and skydiving experts have argued that no sane person would have jumped in those conditions. Others, especially military veterans, disagree. They point out that the jump, while dangerous, was not impossible. If Cooper had combat or paratrooper experience, especially from World War II or Korea, he may have been trained for night drops into hostile terrain. It was risky, but not beyond human capability. One of the most compelling aspects of the jump is how precise Cooper was in his demands. He instructed the pilots to fly under 10,000 feet at 100 knots, with the landing gear down and flaps partially extended. These are the exact conditions needed to safely exit from a Boeing 727's rear staircase without being sucked into the engines or tumbling uncontrollably. He also knew the 727 was one of the only commercial jets with a rear air stair that could be lowered mid-flight, something not widely known to the public at the time. And he knew to ask for it. It wasn't just a leap, it was a calculated, deliberate escape. But even with training, survival was far from guaranteed. Assuming Cooper made it to the ground alive, he would have landed in wet, forested terrain, at night, without night vision or GPS. Hypothermia was a real risk, so was injury from landing in trees or rocky ground. No footprints, flares, or signs of human activity were ever found in the days and weeks that followed. Could he have died on impact, his body simply lost in the expanse? The FBI spent months searching. Helicopters flew grid patterns. Soldiers combed the area. Dogs tracked scents. Nothing. Not a shred of parachute fabric, not a boot print, not a signal. If Cooper died in that jump, he took every trace of himself with him. On the other hand, if he didn't die, if he hit the ground, buried the money, changed his name, and vanished, then he didn't just survive, he won. And that's what keeps this mystery burning more than 5 decades later. Why D.B. Cooper still resonates. Over 50 years have passed since D.B. Cooper disappeared into the sky, yet his story continues to echo through American culture like a myth that refuses to die. It's not just the unsolved nature of the crime that keeps people intrigued, it's how he did it and what he represents. In an era of increasingly digital, traceable lives, Cooper pulled off the impossible, a clean escape in broad daylight, without violence, leaving no trace and no confirmed identity. He beat the system with nothing but planning, nerve, and a parachute. The fascination isn't just with the crime, it's with the man. He wasn't a madman. He wasn't erratic or hostile. By all accounts, he was calm, polite, and oddly respectful throughout the hijacking. He ordered a drink, tipped the flight attendant, and made no threats beyond necessity. There was no blood, no panic, no hostages harmed. It was, in its own way, almost surgical. That aura of control has fed a cultural obsession unlike any other criminal case in American history. Cooper has become a symbol of rebellion, of anonymity, of the person who slipped through the cracks and outwitted the most powerful law enforcement agency in the world. He's the outlaw we can't help but admire, not for what he stole, but for the style with which he vanished, and that makes him rare. In the decades since, the mystery has evolved into folklore. His image appears on t-shirts, in movies, in rap lyrics and novels. There are annual conventions, TV specials, and treasure hunters who still comb the Pacific Northwest, hoping for that one final clue. But in recent years, the conversation has shifted again, thanks, in part, to platforms like the Joe Rogan Experience. Rogan didn't approach the story like a conspiracy theorist. He treated it like what it is, a moment in history that deserves clarity. In a culture swamped with speculation, the JRE episode brought on credible guests, former FBI agents, forensic analysts, aviation experts, who stripped the case down to verifiable facts. What remains, as Rogan often emphasizes, is more grounded and more fascinating than any of the fantasy theories. By recentering the story on truth, the JRE episode didn't kill the legend, it sharpened it. Listeners weren't just reminded that D.B. Cooper jumped out of a plane. They were shown how and why it still matters. In a world obsessed with tracking and control, the idea that one man might have disappeared on purpose, never to be found, is both unnerving and exhilarating. Cooper's legend persists not just because he got away, but because he planned to. For more riveting stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.